Hello everybody, Silverbusters here, coming at you with another video. I know I haven't done a video in quite some time, but these are historic times, and I guess if I have any kind of niche on the internet, it's that I am a gold and silver kind of guy and also a history guy. And I would say in the last few days, with the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, that we are entering historic territory. You might even hear people say that are returning to history. You know, the whole saying is that the end of the Cold War, that history ended, that we entered the New World Order, you know, the unipolar, Western dominated world order, and that there would no longer be wars between major powers, and that uh, we were on a new course of history, whereas the old course of history was empires rising, invading, occupying other people, borders changing, and then eventually those empires would fall and some new empire would rise up and take their place and so on. Basically, we are entering the return of that sort of historic period or historical pattern with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. To kind of give you a big picture sense, well, why would Russia invade Ukraine? Well, maybe they're sensing some weakness in the West, right? We have done a lot in my lifetime, and even lesser than that, to fundamentally weaken the power base of the West. And I can give you a few examples here of what I'm talking about. Um, Germany used to have nuclear power plants before Fukushima. They shut those down because they were concerned about nuclear problems, with nuclear waste, radiation, etc., etc., right? They pushed for solar and wind, but solar and wind are intermittent, and the price of electricity started to shoot up, and there were times when they couldn't keep the power grid in Germany running. So what happens? They became dependent on Russian natural gas for their power supply because they were unwilling to either do the investment locally needed to have local sources of natural gas available because of NIMBYism, which is not in my backyardism. It's like it's this sort of conundrum where if you know you're still dependent on fossil fuels, but as long as you can keep all the fossil fuel production out of your country or your backyard or your little neighborhood of countries, as long as it's imported from some of those dirty overseas countries, you can pretend that you're a good little environmentalist, while still, you know, driving around your car, having your heat at home, having all the privileges and benefits of having a steady, reliable source without having to do the sacrifice up front to make the investment necessary in order to have those things for the future, right? So that's one step where the West allowed itself to become dependent on Russian fossil fuels. Another example would be how we reacted to COVID 19. Basically, we shut down the economy, we didn't let people work, we caused damage to our own economy, and when we've gone back and done the tallies, you know, they don't want to advertise these kind of things, but we've got a bureau in the UK who advocated for lockdowns, going back and looking at it, saying that they caused 3 years, they took 3 years off the life of their population for every 1 year of life that they saved from COVID 19. And that's in large part because the people who died from COVID 19 were already extremely elderly or had one foot in their grave for some other reason, you know, because they already had diabetes, they already had some other kind of health problem. So, for all the shutdowns and all the mask wearing and all the shutting down of schools, they only saved 1 year of life for every 3 years of life that they took off. And that's just one aspect of how the West is weakened. Another aspect was, if we can pull a chart up here, quantitative easing. This is quantitative easing since the breakout in the West, since the lockdowns kind of started in March of 2020. And you can see the massive spike there in quantitative easing, which is the Federal Reserve buying bonds, government bonds, corporate debt, mortgage-backed securities, all artificially propping up the economy. Basically, we have doubled down on the mistakes that we made in 2008 of creating bailouts for institutions that weren't able to handle a shock to the system, and encouraged more and more irresponsible lending, irresponsible borrowing, misallocation of capital in the West. Basically, the things that we have not allowed price to be what it is. Price is an indicator that tells us what is in demand and what is important, and what is not in demand and what is not important. And when we give money willy-nilly to people at 0% interest rates or bailouts and loan forgiveness, this dilutes the signal of money, because money can tell you a lot if you listen to it. It will tell you what do people think is important, because they will vote with their dollars, and what is more necessary for society, because those things will be in demand, and the things that are not in demand will have a low price and no one will want to invest in them. Instead, we've got so many zombie companies, and zombie companies are companies that are so in debt that they have to borrow more money to pay interest on the loans that they already have. They can't bring in enough money to pay the interest on the debt that they already have. And naturally, the amount of zombie companies would drastically increase if interest rates weren't held at an artificially rate. If you see this chart is the Federal Reserve buying bonds, right? Buying bonds with money that did not exist beforehand, right? Increasing the money supply. If people wanted to borrow money and the Fed was not here to do this, they would have to offer much higher interest rates. And the signal that people would be getting it right now is, hey guys, right now, things are so tight, you do not need to be spending money you don't have, right? Because it would be rewarding savers and punishing borrowers who are borrowing irresponsibly. But that whole signal process has been removed in the West, at least since 2008. I can go back further, argue the whole 2001 situation had a bailout. If you keep going back further, you get the savings and loan crisis. So this has just been an escalation of failure of responsibility in the West. And this is kind of the big picture thing that I want to take from you. And this is not to back up Russia or to say anything positive about Russia invading Ukraine. I don't think Russia should be invading Ukraine. I don't think one country should be rolling tanks into any other country for all but the most extreme of reasons, which obviously doesn't apply in this case. But at the same time, here's the big takeaway. When this is a historical pattern that has been used and used and used over and over and over again throughout history, and unless you are historically aware, you will fall for this trick that the governments in the West and the central banks in the West are about to do. You're going to fall for this trick unless you're aware of this. They're already trying to do it, right? If CBS was already running an ad saying, oh gosh darn, that inflation, it's all Russia's fault. I gotta find that right now. We're gonna find the CBS blames Russia for inflation. So we're gonna find this. So here it is. And I'm not pandering to Fox, it's just the first one that came up. CBS News ripped for blaming inflation and other economics on Ukraine crisis. New scapegoat has dropped, right? The scapegoat before that was, quote unquote, corporate profits, right? If you listen to some of these left-wing people, they don't understand supply and demand. If you give people trillions of dollars and they run out and buy stuff, if prices don't increase, you don't get a communist utopia, you get shortages. So basically, prices had to go up or everything would be like toilet paper. You know, it was bad enough when went to the shops and half the stuff was gone already. If the prices hadn't increased at the same time, can you imagine people going out with their stimmy checks and already buying stuff they probably didn't need, right? How much more stuff would be taken off if prices hadn't gone? You would just end up with shortages, and there's nothing humanitarian about keeping prices so low that one person comes along and buys all of it, and the other people are out of luck because none of it's available anymore. And that's what price does. Price will ration goods in order to make sure people don't buy more shit than they actually need to buy. But without that mechanism, but let's get back to this point, which is going to basis. CBS News was trying to blame inflation on Russia, on the Ukraine invasion and the Ukraine crisis, even though we know we had inflation all last year. We had record inflation all last year. And it was over 7.5%, and the producer price indexes, which are the underlying costs to the companies that produce goods, were going up more than that, right? So here you already see the mainstream media trying to blame Russia for economic issues, and this has happened in the past over and over and over again. The point I'm trying to make here is we have already made our bed. None of this is Russia's fault. This is the national debt. This is the 30 trillion in national debt. Vladimir Putin did not do this. Nobody in Russia or China or anybody else put a gun to America's head and forced us to run a $30 trillion debt. They didn't do it, okay? Nobody in Russia forced the Federal Reserve to do quantitative easing and add their balance sheet up to $9 trillion. Russia has nothing to do with this. We have already made our bed with our COVID response, with our wasting money on military adventures in Afghanistan and Iraq, with wasting money on welfare programs. When there was a good one the other day that said in California they spend $825,000 per homeless shelter unit. So they're building homes for homeless people, and you got to think that's going to be pretty bare bones and basic, right? It's not going to be a mansion, but it costs them $825,000 to build one shelter unit for one homeless person. I'm sorry, but for $825,000 in Texas, you can buy a moderately sized mansion. Okay? I know the prices have gone up, but that's still true. So why does it take the government of San Francisco $825,000 to build one homeless shelter unit? And the answer is government inefficiency. I don't care what your intentions are. If you are so inept at carrying it out that you just waste and waste and waste money, you're doing more harm than good. So we have already made our bed. We have already earned our inflation. We have already earned our financial crash. We have earned it. We have been putting it off by printing money and pretending and lying to ourselves and living beyond our means and borrowing money that we can't pay back realistically at real rates and just lying to ourselves the whole time. This is not Putin's fault. Yes, Putin can come in and he can screw some stuff up. He will, if this SWIFT action goes through, which the key thing to look on is the SWIFT system. And if you don't know what the SWIFT system is, it's how banks send money to each other. It's a messaging system that authorizes transactions. It doesn't actually do the transactions, but it's the communication systems that banks use to talk to each other internationally. And if they cut Russia out of it, which technically, if you have to dig into these headlines, that this is a selective group, that they're not doing it all. And the big key thing is the whole Russia, Germany, fossil fuels connection. We got to find it in here where It does not detail whether oil and gas payments to Russia, in this case from Germany, will stop. According to Bloomberg in-house energy expert Javier Blas, the answer is no. So basically, all of this other stuff around the edge of, of SWIFT system, unless they're actually stopping payments for cutting off the fossil fuels from Russia and the money flow back and forth, all of this is just theatrics, right? This is all pandering to try to get people to say, "Oh yeah, we did our job. We cut the Russians off. Yay!" And behind the closed scenes, they're still sending billions of dollars to Russia for oil and gas because they know if Russia cuts off the oil and gas, they're going to have a major crisis in Germany, right? Okay. If they do that, that could be a big problem. And yeah, Russia will be to blame for that problem. But Germany is also to blame for being so weak and dependent in the first place when they have all the technology necessary to have nuclear power. They have all the technology necessary to have natural gas wells. They just decided not to do it for environmental reasons so they could virtue signal about how great they are while still being dependent on fossil fuels from a foreign source, and giving that authoritarian government leverage over them so where they have to make a drastic decision between supporting an authoritarian regime that invades other countries or keeping people warm and safe and fed with the energy sources they need. That's their fault. That's our fault in the West, okay? We've earned this. We have long earned whatever crash that we get financially, and to try to pin it all on Vladimir Putin is misdirection. They're going to want to reset the system. It's only a matter of time. The Great Reset is not a conspiracy theory. It's a conspiracy fact. Klaus Schwab and all those assholes in Davos, they're real. And they're making plans, and they're not plans that are good for you. They're the plans where you'll own nothing, and they'll tell you to be happy, but you might really not like it at the end of the day. Okay? That's the important part that I'm trying to get across here, is that the Davos crowd, the big powers that be in governments in the West, they're going to try to play the victim here. They're going to play the victim and say, "Oh, boo-hoo, the economy was recovering, but then Russia invaded. It's all Russia's fault, so we're going to have to steal half of your money, or 2/3 of your money, or 95% of your money in your bank account, and reset the currency, and it's all that bad man Putin's fault." No, it's not. And I'm not carrying water for Russia here. We have earned this financial crash. This financial crash is our fault. Do not be tricked by these people, because if you buy into the reset, if you put your assets into the reset too early, because there will be multiple resets, and the first resets will fail because they will so grossly benefit the ones in power, the elites who caused the problem in the first place, right? Don't buy into that system, and don't buy into the old blame Putin, because the reset is being created by the same people who created the problem, the same people who did the quantitative easing, the same people who did the bailouts. They are one and the same. We're going to have to go back to a sound money currency. And that does not mean an electronic central bank managed digital currency that they can summon out of thin air anytime they want to increase the money supply or decrease the money supply or freeze your bank account anytime you honk too loud in a protest, right? That is just a digital cattle farm where you are the cattle and the digital currency is the fence. And if you want to do anything that goes outside of their fence, like protesting, which you're supposed to be able to do in a free country, the Canadian trucker people were not burning anything like the Black Lives Matter people were. There were not 22 deaths associated with the protests like there were in the protests in America, right? The digital currency is a fence to keep you on a digital farm where you are the product, where you are farmed by the elites at their leisure because you have no way out of the system. That system will fail, but some people will lose everything buying into that system before realizing how draconian and how authoritarian that system is and how much control it gives to elites, that it is anti-democratic, that it's anti-constitutional, and that it is just anti-humanitarian, because cutting off someone's ability to feed themselves or clothe themselves or house themselves because you disagree with their political position is not a tolerant position to take. It is not compatible with anything that we might call a free society. And it doesn't matter whether you come at this from the left or right, because within my lifetime, United States, Canada, the West, we have flip-flopped left-leaning government, right-leaning government, left-leaning government, right-leaning government over the years, right? Do you really want, every time there's a 51% to 49 flip-flop on the right-left spectrum, to have your bank account frozen, to have your job threatened, to have your ability to go to the grocery store and buy food turned off because, the 51% party disagrees with some opinion you hold in the 49% party? Is that the world you want to live in? Is that really a democracy? Is that's just the 51% deciding to murder the 49% because they're the majority, in air quotes? That's not how a republic works. A republic narrowly defines the power of government to limited things where they get to make decisions on a few things that's written in the Constitution that they get to do. And they don't get to do anything else. They don't get to do all the other things. They don't get to freeze the bank accounts of their political opponents because they win an election 51% to 91%. That's not a stable society. That's set up for civil war. Okay? So that's the point I'm trying to get across. This is kind of a rant, but I'm trying to convey a historical idea to you. This has happened before. This happened in World War II. You had the Great Depression, and you had all these problems, and everybody in the world was like, let's blame someone else. In Germany, it was, let's blame the Jews. And in Russia, it was, let's blame the capitalists. In Japan, it was, let's blame everyone who's not Japanese for having empires. And we want an empire because we need to grow our economy. You seeing a trend here? Right? Everybody is just using war as an excuse to blame others for their own failures to work within a rational system. And instead of accepting that they had failed or made mistakes, Germany should have said, yeah, we fucked up in World War One. Maybe all those alliances and having a massive World War One, because of some minor scuffle in the Balkans, maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe we could have found a way to have negotiate our differences with the British and the French and everybody else without, causing a massive war. They didn't do that. And the other side has their blame to that too. We look back at World War One and we see how crazy World War One was. It's like, how did we not stop this from happening? Because there was no reason to have a war on that kind of scale because of what happened in the Balkans, but it happened anyway. And I'm starting to lose my voice here a little bit, but I'm hoping I've conveyed this to you, that if you see a effort to reset the system based on the Russian war and the motivation given is, we have to do these things, they're not good things, but it's Russia's fault. Bullshit. Call bullshit. Stay as far away from that new system as you can. Do not accept a digital currency. Do not load up your bank account and dump it into into a new system or accept this. You need to get as much of your resources outside of the system before the government attempts to do this old historical maneuver of blaming others for problems they've already created for themselves, and protect yourself. Because if you don't, Well, now you should see it coming. From a historical basis, you should see it coming. And I've just explained to you how it's been done before and how it's going to happen again and how they're going to try to pin all of the quantitative easing, all of the COVID restrictions, all the great financial 2008 crisis stuff that was just papered over and bailed out. All of this stuff that the $30 trillion in U.S. debt that we really didn't need to create from Afghanistan and Iraq and overgenerous welfare programs and waste and graft and corruption in government, all of that stuff, all of it taken together, is our fault, and we are to blame for that. It's not Russia's fault, and yes, Russia might cause some more problems, but all the stuff we've done in the past that's bringing on this reset, that great reset that the Davos people want to do, Putin didn't do it. It's our fault. We have to own up to it, and you need to protect yourself and get out of the system, and that's with gold and silver. And these are just random advertisements. I am not supporting whatever these companies are. Do your own research before buying gold and silver. But if you don't have your own assets outside of the system, you're asking to fall for one of history's oldest tricks that the governments have pulled time and again against their people. Anyway, this is Silver Busters. Sorry that my first time back is such a long one, but I had to get this out there. It seems like my little niche of history plus silver, and I wanted to get it to you guys. So you have a great day wherever you are. Protect yourself in these trying times. I'll talk to you later.